Now please be seated. The first thing I want to say is, once again, it's good to be with you, and I thank David for the invitation. Secondly, I am I've met quite a number of you before. I am the chaplain, board chaplain with the Mission to Seafarers, a worldwide organization that cares for the welfare of the men and women who work at sea. The international seafarers that come here to Vancouver on ships. And I'm also a priest of the diocese. And I have here what's called Message in a Bottle, Dear Seafarer. And at the back of church there are some sheets, and you can write a message to a seafarer, or a word of thanks, a prayer, whatever you would like, to encourage and show support for them, so they know that they're not alone when they're a long way from home, families, in difficult circumstances. So you can put that in the bottle, and then there's the top here, and people always ask, how do you get them out? Well, I put a hole in the back, always planning ahead. So, and then I give these out to the seafarers when I go on board the ships and visit the ships, so that they see that people are thinking of them and praying for them. So I'll leave this at the back of church after the service. And as I say, some of those sheets are there. And so may the words of my mouth,
our Redeemer. So as we've just heard in our gospel reading today, Jesus said to his disciples, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Get some rest. Those are words from Mark 6:31. Have you ever felt there's not enough hours in the day to get everything done? I know myself, I've said, I haven't got the time. I haven't got the time. Have you ever felt in a frenzy? Have you ever felt hurried, hassled at home, in work? Well, I'm sure that's the experience of many, if not all of us, in this fast-paced world. Even the food is fast. And increasingly people want to be in a quiet place. And that can mean away from distractions, whatever those distractions might be. Just a place of quietness. Might be out in nature, could be reading a book, could be just resting in bed. This week's gospel reading, Mark 6, speaks about a number of things. It speaks about the demands of discipleship. It speaks about the attention that exists in being a disciple of Jesus. On the one hand, there are the demands of being a Christian, the responsibilities of being a Christian when there is a need to respond to that need. And then, of course, on the other hand, there is being a good steward of yourself, practicing good self-care. Mark 6 is a reminder that spiritual, emotional, and our physical batteries need recharging. We can't keep going. We're not like that Energizer bunny. If you ever remember that advert, it keeps going and going and going. Our batteries, we need recharging. In Mark 6, there are fringe verses at the beginning of the reading and at the end. And in the middle, we have an account, a story. And that's often you'll find in the Gospels. You'll have a main story, and then on the outside, there are those transition verses which carry us across. So Jesus got in the boat with his disciples, and they went out into the lake. Those are transition verses. Other transition verses might be, like in Mark 7, Jesus went alone by himself to pray and to rest. And so here we have today two sets of transition verses in the gospel reading. One at the beginning, Mark 6:30, and one, Mark 6:53. And these are important. There's important messages in them, but I say often they can get neglected by the main story. The first transition we hear in Mark 6:30, the disciples are exhilarated, but they're also exhausted, so they're probably running on adrenaline. And they're also hungry. And we know that because it even says in there, they didn't even get time to eat. Isn't that strange to put that in? They didn't even get time to eat. Due to the demands of the crowd, and if you recall a few weeks ago, we heard about the disciples on the boat going across Lake Gennesaret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. And they were afraid. So they're probably exhausted. The crowds and the stress of going across the lake, and they needed a rest. They didn't even get time to eat. Jesus sensed that they needed a break to recuperate and find solace. And so, wanting to set an example, he says, "Come away to a quiet place with me to rest." And he was unapologetic about this. The need for rest and solitude. He saw no shame in taking a break and having a rest. We must also remember that at this point, Jesus is mourning. He's grieving because John the Baptist has lost his head. John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, he's grieving for John. So Jesus himself needs a rest, needs time to pray, to reconnect with God the Father, and to find inspiration for the journey ahead. In the second transition verses, at the end of Mark 6:30-53, again we meet the crowd. And of course the crowd are making demands of Jesus. As the boat lands on the other side, you sort of picture it as it drifts into the sand. The crowd are all there waiting for Jesus. You know, they've been hurrying around the lake to get to the other side, and there is Jesus. They're carrying their sick to him on mats. In every village, wherever Jesus goes, swarms of people come to him for healing. They press in on him. They even touch his robe to be healed. We hear about the unnamed woman who did that very thing. What does Jesus do? Remember, he said, well, let's go away and rest for a while. But Jesus is moved by compassion. And here you see that tension. All who touched him were healed, we read. For Jesus tends to the sheep as a shepherd does. Jesus sheds a tear. He is emotional, and he responds to the emotions and needs of the crowd. And so the tension between responding with compassion to the needs of others and also recharging the batteries and having a rest, or we could put it as practicing self-care. Seafarers describe it to me as refreshing. I hear that a lot. It's time to refresh. We need to refresh. Perhaps you have said, as I have, I need a break. I'm tired. And yet, there's something more that needs done. I'll have a rest after this because there is a need here that there's something I have to do, something I need to do first. On the occasion of the Episcopal Church's General Convention in the United States, Archbishop Michael Curry, who's a very inspirational preacher, said that we as Christians need to buck the trends of the world and go against the grain. And he said, when we do, sometimes it looks crazy. But he said, it looks much more like the life of Jesus. And he continues, if we're going to buck the trends of the world, and part of that is profit before people, Jesus always saw the people and the human person. One such trend is bucking what Archbishop Curry describes as the idol of busyness. And we need to rest. Archbishop Curry says, we have worth, but it doesn't come from our 70-hour work weeks or our month straight with no day off. Curry says, those aren't things to boast about. Those aren't a badge of honor. You know, I've been working for 2 months and I haven't had a break. He said, these are marks of an unbalanced life, an imbalanced ministry, and an arid spiritual life. He says, a well that has run dry. So busy, but we need rest. Frederick Buechner, another inspirational preacher, said, a bleeding heart is of no use to anyone at all if it bleeds itself to death. So our heart can beat for others in a desire to respond, but we also need to give ourselves that time to rest. As we've just read in Mark 6, Jesus also lived with this tension. Mindful, of course, we are not Jesus, where he could respond. We as human beings, we need time to rest, to take that compassionate self-time. It's why Jesus is saying to each of us, come away to a quiet place by yourself and rest a while. What Jesus is doing here is giving us permission. He's saying, yes, there are many needs that are placed on you. But let me tell you, it's important that you rest. And don't feel guilty. And don't feel you need to apologize. Jesus is saying to you and I, as he did to the very first disciples, Jesus is saying something like this: I delight in your creativity and your accomplishments. They give me great joy. But everything isn't going to come crashing down if you take a rest. The work of God on earth is not dependent on you alone. God continues to be there for the people, the sheep, just like Jesus was for the crowds on that lake shore as the shepherd. And this compassionate self-care can be described as taking a Sabbath rest. A Sabbath rest. Barbara Brown Taylor, another inspirational preacher, said, I thought these words were interesting, made me think, Sabbath is a gift. Why then are we so reluctant to accept it? That's why God had to make it a commandment. And Eugene Peterson, you may have read or come across what's called The Message. Eugene Peterson said, a true Sabbath takes the time to pay attention to God, as well as find joy in creation, to both pray and play. As the church, the people of God gathered, as we are today, we are to encourage one another and hold each other accountable for our wellness, our wholeness, and our stewardship of all the gifts that God has given us, including the very life that we have been gifted with, the very precious life that we each have. We need to show the same compassion and concern for one another as Jesus did for his disciples. So sometimes that means we have to say, look, let me do that. Or maybe you need a rest. You go home. Or you don't need to worry about it today. I've got it. Or you're looking tired at the minute. You know? And we do ask one another, don't we? Say to each other, how are you today? And that's compassion, that's kindness. I think a part of it too is listening. Sometimes that's the most helpful thing, is just listening. Don't need to say anything, just to listen. So we as a community can help one another to find that rest, or maybe even to direct someone. Maybe you need a rest. It's why our gathering here in church, to come away to this deserted place, is the most important time in our week, because we are reminded that God has drawn near to us in Jesus. And so we come here to listen for Jesus to speak to us. We are eager to taste his goodness in the bread and the wine from the table, seeking comfort and hope and inspiration to recharge our batteries. A place where God breathes new life into us so that, yes, we are ready. We are able to respond to the needs of the world with compassion, sharing the good news. And now to God, the Father, the Son, the Three in One. Amen. So as God draws near to us, let us draw near to God as we confess our